Okay, all right. So here we are. So let's continue with the Arya Pariyesana Sutta that we just very briefly started this morning. And so we're going to look at now the difference between the noble search and the ignoble search, and to see how this actually works out. So let's just, might as well just get straight into it. And so this is what the Buddha says, and this is how he defines the ignoble quest. And what is the ignoble quest? It's when someone who is themselves liable to be reborn seeks what is also liable to be reborn. Themselves liable to grow old, to fall sick, to die, to sorrow, to become corrupted, they seek what is also liable to these things. So we have here the idea that you already have a problem. These are obviously problems. Rebirth, growing old, falling, die, sorrowing, becoming corrupted. These are the problems in your life. And then instead of trying to find a solution to the problem you have, you make the problem worse by seeking other things that have exactly the same problem. And so you're multiplying the problem rather than resolving it. So this is kind of the idea here, that's called the ignoble search, because we are basically searching for dukkha. And if you're searching for dukkha while thinking you are searching for sukha, in other words, you're getting it all wrong. That's why it's called the ignoble search. But the search where you are searching for, you are searching correctly, you're searching for what gives rise to happiness when you want happiness, that's then obviously the noble search. So one of the things here is the idea of reborn, and maybe that kind of surprises those of you who are into Pali language, because the word here is jati. And jati, normally translated into English as birth, here it is translated as reborn or rebirth, if you like. And this is an interesting question of translation. How should things be translated? And the word jati itself, it can mean birth. It kind of means birth in a very general sense. But it's important to realize the context in which it is used. And context always decides meaning. And so for example, in the first noble truth, you have the first noble truth is jati jara maranang, jati jara maranang, or jati vyadi maranang, depending on the version you have. And the first noble truth is to be overcome. That's the purpose of the path. To get rid of the factors of the first noble truth, because the first noble truth is dukkha. So if jati is dukkha, it can only refer to future jati, only can refer to jati in the future life, because you cannot overcome the jati, the dukkha that has already happened in this life. That's impossible, it's too late. You have already made that mistake of getting reborn, and now you're stuck with it. You've got to deal with it. But what you can avoid, the jati, dukkha, that you can avoid is jati of future life. And so jati in the First Noble Truth must refer to rebirth. It's kind of obvious once you get your head around that one. And in general, in India, ancient India, the idea of rebirth was part of the culture. And because it was part of the culture, when they heard the word jati, it would always mean birth and rebirth at the same time. And so the meaning for them would be rebirth. And so when they heard the word jati, they would hear rebirth. But when we hear birth, especially in the English language, if someone says birth, nobody would ever dream of thinking rebirth. That's impossible. That's completely out of it. And so what you hear is something different than what the ancient Indian hears. And if what you hear is different, it means you haven't translated properly. And so the only correct translation then must be rebirth, because then you hear the same as the ancient Indians actually heard at that time. So that's kind of a translation issue, right? We always need to ask ourselves when we translate the suttas, what message are they actually telling? What information is the hearer getting when they get this message? And then we have to translate according to that information that actually the person hears. But if it is true that rebirth was part of the Indian culture, doesn't that mean that the Buddha just took on board the local culture when he believed in rebirth? Because we're always arguing about the Buddha. We always say that the Buddha, he discovered everything for himself. He didn't really take on anything in the culture. But here, it seems like he's considering it, if he talks about overcoming rebirth, actually we'll come to this further down when we come to it later on. But if the culture already had the idea that jati is rebirth, then it seems likely that the Buddha will have taken that on, right? So what is it? Did the Buddha just take it on, or did he actually discover it? And I think the answer to these things are always more complicated than you think. And I think the answer is that he both accepted it as a general idea in that society, but he also wanted to ascertain it for himself. And that's why he goes through the recollection of past lives and all of these things on the day of his awakening or the week of his awakening or whatever it was. So it's like a mixture of things. The Buddha is an inquirer. He wants to know this for himself. But also, because it is part of society, obviously he will tend to accept it just like everyone else. And so it's a mixture. And it's always more, these things are always a bit more involved usually than kind of what you might think straight away here. So anyway, so you're seeking all of these things that have all of these problems. And being reborn is the first of them. Rebirth is a problem because it carries on the cycle of existence. So there were some people who understood the problem of the cycle of existence already at that time. It may not be obvious. Often you hear that people are happy that they get reborn, so they get another chance. People who want to be reborn, because otherwise they will disappear. If they don't get reborn, they would rather get reborn than disappear. And it means you haven't really understood the issue involved with rebirth. And so here, actually, already there is a profound understanding here of the problem, understanding that rebirth actually is an issue. And you see this later on in the sutta, later on in the same sutta, the Buddha after his awakening, when he uses the Buddha chaku, the eye of the Buddha, to survey the world, he says that he sees beings who are pure, beings who are impure, beings with sharp faculties, beings with dull faculties. He's surveying the world to see if anyone will be able to understand his message, his profound teaching. And then he says that he sees people, even beings, who see danger in the future life. In other words, who see danger in the idea of rebirth. So people understand that problem already. And this is obviously what's going on with the Buddha here. Because it's not so obvious why rebirth would be a problem. It takes a bit of insight to understand that. However, the rest of these things, it's easy to understand. Growing old, okay, not so good. Falling sick, not so nice. Dying, a bit problematic. Sorrow, no one wants to sorrow, and becoming corrupted, that's an interesting one. We'll discuss that later on when we come down to this. So let's just go through each of these ones in a little bit of detail. So the Buddha says, what should be described as liable to be reborn? Partners and children, male and female bondservants, goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle, gold and money are liable to be reborn. These attachments are liable to be reborn. Someone who is tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to be reborn, seeks what is also liable to be reborn. So, partners and children, So, obvious, all of these beings here, male and female bondservants, is a bit like slaves, basically. Dasa and dasi are the Pali words. Goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, Elephants and cattle, obviously all of these things are liable to be reborn. Yeah, these are ordinary animals, they die, they get reborn. And why are all of these things mentioned? The reason they are mentioned is because these are the things that people owned at that time. These are the things they were attached to. This was how the wealth of a person was counted. If you had lots of elephants and lots of cattle and horses, you were a wealthy person, and you would hold on to these things. So that's why it is mentioned in this way. And all of them are liable to be reborn. They all have the same problem that you have. They all should be seeking freedom from bondage and should not really be carrying on in this way. The last one is gold and money. It's a little bit hard to see how that fits with the idea of birth. You could argue that these things get created, they are born, but reborn doesn't really work, right? It's kind of a little bit of a stretch. So it's not quite clear. Usually in the suttas, when we talk about rebirth, old age and death and these things, we talk about beings, don't talk about material things. So it is possible that there is some kind of corruption here. In fact, when you look at the various versions of the sutta, there is a great variety to the extent to which gold and money is actually included. In some versions it's included everywhere, in some other versions only occasionally. So there may have been a problem in the transmission of this sutta. This is the sort of little things that you find may be corruptions in the suttas. Yeah, the various versions have slightly different ideas how this works. Anyway, it's not an important point. So all of these things are liable to this. These attachments, yeah, are liable to be reborn. In other words, you attach to these things because this is what you own. So if you are tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to being reborn, someone who is tied to these things seeks what is also liable to be reborn. So the idea of seeking these things is equivalent to attaching to them. We seek them because we want to attach. And once we are attached, then we seek to preserve them, to keep them ours, to hold on to them. So here, seeking is equivalent to attaching and being infatuated with these things. So this is the idea of the ignoble search. You're searching for stuff that is going to cause you suffering in the future. It's a bad idea to seek for suffering. And that's what most people do. They seek for suffering. All right. And what should be described as liable to grow old? Partners and children, male and female servants, goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle, gold and money are liable to grow old. These attachments are liable to grow old. Someone who is tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to grow old, seeks what is also liable to grow old. So it's kind of obvious with all the beings, but again, gold and money, yeah, I guess that kind of wears out eventually. It goes old in a sense, and maybe in this case, maybe it works with gold and money. And what should be described as liable to fall sick? Partners and children, male and female servants, goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle are liable to fall sick. These attachments are liable to fall sick. Someone who is tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to fall sick, seeks what is also liable to fall sick. So same idea again. Sickness is a problem, and you don't want to multiply that problem. And what should be described as liable to die? Partners and children, male and female servants, goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle are liable to die. These attachments are liable to die. Someone who is tied, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to die, seeks what is also liable to die. So again, dying is usually the biggest problem, and so we should seek more of that. Let me just check the word for attachment, because it's interesting. So, upadayo, so upadayo is the word for attachments here. So these are all the things that we can hold onto in the world, things that we tend to think of as owning. These are, this is what upadi means, upadayo here in the plural. So these are the attachments. Okay, what should be described as liable to sorrow? Partners and children, male and female servants, goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle are liable to sorrow. These attachments are liable to sorrow. Someone who is tired, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to sorrow, seeks what is also liable to sorrow. Yeah, it's bad enough to sorrow yourself, but when the things that you are attached to, the things that you are dear to you, when they sorrow, that's also painful. Yeah, when your family members sorrow. It is even painful when your pet sorrows. Yeah, the pets get depressed. The cat you have gets depressed or whatever. It's kind of anyone who has had a pet knows that animals can have a lot of emotions. Yeah. And certainly the higher animals like the elephants and things, they are very well known. I think I'm sure many of you can tell me stories about elephants here in Sri Lanka who have all kinds of emotions. And so clearly they are also liable to these same kind of problems as human beings. It's very useful to observe animals and to see them, see their emotions, see how they live, and see how similar they are in many ways to human beings. And then you have more compassion for them when you see that. You gain more insight into them, and you can start to understand why being reborn as an animal is not all that strange. Yeah, the distance between humans and animals just isn't that great sometimes, and so it kind of starts to make sense much more. And what should be described as liable to corruption? Again, partners and children, male and female bondservants, goats and sheep, chickens and pigs, elephants and cattle, gold and money are liable to corruption. So these attachments are liable to corruption. Someone who is tired, infatuated, and attached to such things, themselves liable to corruption, seeks what is also liable to corruption. This is the ignoble quest. So what does it mean that people are liable to corruption? The Pali word here is, what is it? It's sankilesa. Yeah, sankilesa is very closely related to upakilesa, what we saw before. But sankilesa seems to be more like defilements in a very general sense. Upakilesa, we're talking about very refined defilements of the mind. But sankilesa is more like kilesa, just general corruption, general bad things. And so when we talk about people being liable to corruption, it means that they are liable to defilements. Yeah, they're liable to anger, they're liable to greed, they're liable to confusion, to delusion, all of these kind of things. You get married to someone, and they're very nice, and they turn out to be liable to all these bad things. You know what I mean? People change over time. They start out as angels, and they end up as demons. Sometimes that's true, right? Or occasionally people start out really bad, and then they turn out to be much better. But things are liable to corruption. We don't know who it is that we are a partner with. We don't know how they're going to turn out in the long run. And that's kind of scary and really unpleasant. Yeah, who is this partner of mine? Are they really the person I think they are? Do I fully understand all the tendencies? Do I know what they will turn out like in 10 years' time? They're very sweet in the beginning, and after a while they treat you very badly, maybe. We just don't know what we are, the people around us very well. And of course, it's the same thing in also sometimes in monastic life. You have maybe a monastic friend who turns out not to be what you thought they were, or a teacher who turns out not to be quite what you thought the teacher was. We are liable to corruption, and some things corrupt us more than other things, and then it kind of brings out the worst in us because the corrupting tendencies that influence us in one way or another. And this is kind of really unpleasant. And this is a thing I think sometimes people don't think properly about. That makes the whole idea of relationships kind of kind of a bit more yucky, yeah, and that's kind of a good thing. If you're thinking of becoming a monastic, great, the relationships are always a bit troublesome. And then you have children maybe, and what are those children going to be like? You have no idea. I don't know how anyone can have children, right? You don't know who these beings are going to be here. You're bringing these things into your life, and you think you have some kind of control over them, that they're going to somehow follow your commands and do what you want. And of course they're not going to follow your commands. And if you want an intelligent, bright child, guaranteed you're going to get a stupid and dull one instead. That happens all the time, right? Everyone wants to have intelligent, nice, kind of well-behaved children. We have no guarantee what the children are going to be here. They're coming from the past. They already have a personality. They're not the kind of carte blanche that you can form into whatever you want. Absolutely not. It's a gamble. It's like a roll of the dice to have children. It's better to go to the casino and lose some money than having a child. No, please don't do that. I'm just messing around. But you see the point? Yeah, the point is that we just don't know. People are very uncertain. People are corruptible. We don't know really what people are like. It is very uncertain what we're getting ourselves into. Families and all of these kind of things. It's just really, really unreliable. And I'm sure some of you have, some of the lay people, you probably have some very nice children, and I don't mean to say anything bad about your family for sure. I'm just kind of saying in general, it's just very uncertain, and you never know. So anyway, so this is the idea of corruption. Yeah, it's a scary aspect of human beings. And gold and money is also liable to corruption. Sometimes you get counterfeit money, counterfeit gold, kind of valueless stuff. Everything is uncertain, everything is unreliable in this world. You never know how long things are going to last. And so these attachments are liable to corruption. So being tied and infatuated and attached to these things, when they are liable to change and to be corrupted, it's kind of, you can start to see the madness of this. It does not make any sense. And you can see how you open up yourself for suffering if you do that. It's kind of very obvious when it's put in this way. All of these things are subject to death. Every time you attach to something that is subject to death, you're going to suffer seriously. Yeah, you know this already. We already talked about this during some of the discussion sessions we had. Same thing with sickness and illness. It's kind of very, very obvious. We're asking for problems. And so this is the ignoble quest. And now we come to the opposite. What is the noble quest? It is when someone who is themselves liable to be reborn understands the drawbacks in being liable to be reborn, seeks the unborn, or the freedom from birth, supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment. So you understand, first of all, you can see here the noble quest begins with right view. Right view, always at the very first point. You know, first of all, that you are liable to be reborn, right? This is the first point. And so again, this comes from faith, And so yes, we should have that faith in the beginning. Assume that that is true. That is kind of what it means to be Buddhist. So you have some idea that you are probably liable to be reborn, and then you have to contemplate the drawbacks or the dangers, the adinava, in being liable to be reborn. This is one of the things that you have to do. What does it actually mean, the idea of being reborn? What would it be like to kind of go on being reborn again and again and again? What would that feel like? And I think when you start to reflect on the idea of rebirth, and you start to understand what it actually means, and when you kind of hear about people who maybe have recalled their past lives or whatever, you understand how scary it is, because you don't know where you're going to be reborn. The karma is so uncertain. There's a very famous simile of the stick in the sutta. We talk about where you're going to reborn, and the Buddha says, like throwing up a stick in the air, and the stick goes around and around. Which end is it going to fall on? So you can make some good karma, like weighing one of the end more heavily than the other one, but still it is unreliable. If you look at the Mahakamavibhanga Sutta, Majjhima Nikaya 136, it talks about the complexities of rebirth. Someone who lives really well can still be reborn in a bad place because there is some old karma that takes you there. It's worrying, right? It is scary. So yes, you do your very best, but still it is uncertain. And even if you get reborn as a human being, how many human lives do you want? Do you really want to do all of these things once more? Do you want to go back to being a small child, being dependent on your parents, not knowing what's going on, then going to school and having a hard time at school? It's always difficult to be a small child. In the beginning, it's really scary. Then growing up, being a teenager again. Do you want to be a teenager again? Then having to study really hard and your parents kind of saying, get A's, we only want to see A's, no B's. And maybe you're not so smart, you can't get A's, and the pressure is on you. Then going to university, and then getting married once again. Do you want to do that? Even becoming a monk once again is bad enough. And keep on doing these things, and around and around and around. It's not as if, if I think about my own life, I've had a very good life in many ways. I can't really complain. I haven't really I've had plenty of enough dukkha, but nothing kind of, nothing crazy. In many ways a really good life, but do I want to do it again? Absolutely not. I'm fed up with this. And I probably have done it millions of times before anyway. There comes a point when you have enough of these things. And then the uncertainty of a bad rebirth. Everything is really incredibly unreliable. And when you start to understand these drawbacks of being reborn, the continuation of the round, when you contemplate what is going on, when the Buddha says the amount of tears that you have cried throughout the samsaric round is more than the water in the four oceans. That's kind of extraordinary, the amount of tears you have cried. How much tears do you have during one life? The average life, how many liters of tears? I don't know how many liters of tears during an average life. The average person, let's say 1 liter. Okay, 1 liter of tears. We should test this one. We should have one person, all the tears they have to collect it in a bucket, and then we measure it after they're dead and see how much it is. It's a nice Buddhist kind of experiment. And then you take all the water in the oceans, and you start to kind of count how many liters is there in the ocean. I don't know, it's probably really uncalculable, trillions and whatever of liters. And it becomes really kind of hard to grasp, How much is the blood that you have shed through having your head cut off as an animal and as a human being through punishment? More than the water in the four oceans. These similes are just almost incomprehensible. The amount of dukkha is just really just out of, it's hard to imagine. In fact, it is impossible to imagine the amount of dukkha. And if we take these things seriously, then we have to get out of this. And the sooner we do it, the sooner we get going with this, the better for us, because this actually is very worrying. So this is about understanding the drawbacks. So when it comes to rebirth, we just have to contemplate it. We just have to consider what is really going on, and you start to understand the problem. And, again, it is driven by, of course, here, the confidence that there is such a thing as rebirth in the first place. So that is really important. And we have to start with that to have some degree of right view. So this is the idea of right view. And then, because of that, you seek something else. And what you seek is not the unborn, as Ajahn Sujato would have it. I would tell him off for translating in this way. Actually, I will never tell him off, but anyway, I'm just saying that for effect right now. What we are seeking is the freedom from birth, because birth is the problem. We want the freedom from birth, the ajata. And I think that is a more meaningful translation than saying the unborn, which to me can be easily misunderstood. Freedom from birth is the contextual meaning here, or freedom from rebirth, to be precise. The supreme sanctuary from the yoke is the Anuttara Yoga Kema. Yoga is a yoke that ties us to existence. And Kema is a sanctuary, or a place of freedom, a place of you can rest and you can relax, like an oasis or something like that. and you are seeking extinguishment. Extinguishment here meaning the extinguishment of dukkha, essentially. So this is kind of how you need to contemplate this. Understanding what this means, and then your mind start to look in a different direction, seeking the freedom from rebirth, from the born. Themselves liable to grow old, understanding the drawbacks in being liable to grow old, seeks the freedom from old age, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment. You are liable to grow old. Do you want to be older? Being old is a lot of dukkha. Sometimes I don't think we understand how much dukkha it is to grow older. I was at a conference in Singapore recently, and it was a very nice conference, typical Buddhist kind of conference. Some of the presenters there, they were like medical doctors, and they presented the reality of old age. And one of the things they said was that for the average person, the last 10 years of your life, you are basically debilitated. There's nothing much you can do. Last 10 years of life is just basically just dukkha. And you are most of the time just lying in the bed. There's very little mobility, very few things you can do. That is like for the average person. For some people, that stretches out maybe to 20 years. And so it is, the end of life is often far more difficult than we actually think it is. And it's useful to remember that you don't really want to become old again. And so you want to understand the problem with that. Contemplating simple things like old age can be very, very useful. It's very simple and easy to contemplate. One way of contemplating old age is to look at yourself in the mirror. You reach a certain age and things start to become worse. You know what I mean? You look at yourself in the mirror and you're kind of getting lines in your face, and things are getting more saggy, and your hairs are turning grey, and everything is kind of not what it used to be. So sometimes what happens when we do that? When you see yourself in the mirror and you see yourself growing old, what happens? And very often what happens, and I think this happens to everyone, even to monastics this would happen, because it's just a natural human reaction. No one wants to go old, whether you are a monastic or you're a layperson. Obviously for lay people it's worse, because appearances are far more important in lay life. Nevertheless, it is not easy always to see. So what happens is that when you look yourself in the mirror, the first reaction for most people is like denial. You don't really want to see this. You deny it. You kind of blot it out, and you look at something else, or you don't really want to see what is going on. But please notice that reaction when that happens. Notice that action of denial, because that is a sign that you're not really living according to truth. And the moment you notice it, take a moment instead. No, look again in the mirror. Take in what is actually happening here. And what happens, and it's kind of a miraculous thing that happens when you do that, because when you do take it in, when you accept that you are growing old, what happens is that you become peaceful. This is what the contemplation of old age do. And you become peaceful because you come to accept the reality of old age. It means that you let go of your infatuation with the body to some extent. You don't attach to the body so much because you realize it is out of control. At that moment you understand the body is not really interesting because it is subject to all these forces that are destructive, are going to destroy it, take away whatever beauty or handsomeness you had before is going to be gone. And so you lose interest in the body at that point. And this is the power of very simple insight, using these kind of ideas that the Buddha is talking about here. You are aware of old age, and it reduces the attachment to the body right away when you take it on board. So stay with it. Understand it. This is happening. This is the reality. And then allow the mind to let go, and the mind will let go. So this is kind of understanding impermanence and using that. We're talking about anicca all the time. Using the idea of permanence to help us to let go. is such a simple thing, but we waste the opportunities. The opportunities are there all the time. Yeah. Next time you look in the mirror, instead of kind of avoiding the wrinkles, see if you can discover some new wrinkles. Another wrinkle. Okay, yuck. Okay, finished with the body. That's kind of the right way. Yeah, more gray hairs. Okay, yay, gray hairs. Welcome. This is what you can expect when you go old. And this is really the right way to think about it, because then the mind becomes peaceful. Not only does the mind become peaceful, but it inclines towards the Dhamma. Because every time you let go of the five sense world, every time you see the yuckiness of the five sense world, the mind moves to spiritual life instead. It moves to the Dhamma instead. Such a simple contemplation, yet so powerful. These are the contemplations that the Buddha to be, the Bodhisattva, used before his own awakening. This is what made the Buddha to be go forth. Yeah, this is how powerful it is. Simple contemplation like this. So please use it. Take all of these opportunities. They are really, really powerful. So this is the first mistake we make. Yeah, we deny the reality. We don't really want to see what's going on. The second thing that the foolish person does after denying the reality is think, well, what can I do about this, right? Okay, this is happening, but actually I can probably control it anyway, yeah? So, what will I do? I will go and get some Botox, yeah? Kind of smooth out the wrinkles in my face. I'll get some nice makeup to kind of make it all look nice. I will get some coloring for my hair, so my hair looks like it always did before. This is how we try to control old age. And the problem with that idea of controlling it is that it makes us feel as if we can control it. Yeah? The more you try, and you will succeed a little bit, and that little bit of success gives the delusion that you can control old age. And that is really problematic, because this is the false sense of self trying to show itself and to kind of make something out of something that actually is dukkha. So we're not using the opportunity to understand impermanence. We're not using the opportunity to understand non-self. These things are not really controllable. Under the surface, the process of old age will still happen. It's just the appearances that are kind of kept up for a short time. So this is the second mistake we do, trying to kind of make things right. Buying into the sense of self, pretending that the sense of self somehow can sort out these problems. So this is how you understand old age in the right way. No, I can't control these things. Let them be. Let me just accept this old age. Yeah? Let it come. And if other people don't think that I look as beautiful as before, it is their problem, not mine. I don't care what other people think. This is kind of, we have to get out of this idea of always being kind of there for other people. No, I'm here for me. I want to understand what's going on. This is about wisdom, not about making myself look right in the world. So then we turn a difficult thing slowly into wisdom by thinking about these things in the right way. Simple yet powerful. And then you seek the freedom from old age, because you understand that old age is no good. It's just always the same problems. Don't want to have anything to do with it. And then you seek the freedom from old age, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, and extinguishment, the extinguishing of old age. You don't have to kind of face it again. Themselves liable to fall sick. Yeah? Understanding the drawbacks in being liable to become falling sick. Seeking the freedom from sickness, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment. Yeah, so again, the idea of falling sick. And the first thing again is to understand the drawback in falling sick. Yeah, and you may think that the drawback in falling sick may be obvious, but notice, I don't know, I tend to be a very healthy person. I don't fall sick very often, but when I fall sick, it's kind of terrible. I don't know, it feels really yucky. You're just lying in bed moaning, oh, I can't do anything, you just kind of can't move, and just temperature is high and all these kind of things. It's really terrible to be sick. And so I always have to remind myself, because it only happens to me every kind of 10 years that I fall sick or something, or 20 years or whatever. So you have to remind yourself how bad it actually is. And again, the first thing to remember is that it is the nature of the body to fall sick. And I always Ajahn Brahm has this kind of beautiful ways of putting it, and it's always funny when he tells the stories. But of course, underlying the fun of Ajahn Brahm's stories is the reality of these things. And the reality of sickness is that this body is supposed to fall sick. That's the nature of this body. If it doesn't fall sick, that's really weird. During your life, you can expect a certain amount of sickness. And so Ajahn Brahm always says that when you go to the doctor, you should never say to the doctor, something is wrong with me. You should say, something is right with me. I'm sick again today, doctor. That's what you should say. And that is a change in perception. Nothing has gone wrong when you are sick. If you think something has gone wrong, you are already deluding yourself. You're already on the wrong track. That sickness you have is actually an opportunity to understand the nature of the body. The body is inherently unsatisfactory and full of suffering. And again, just like before, so then that's the first thing. Instead of denying the illness, you accept it. This is the nature of things. And if you accept it, again, the body becomes far less interesting because this is its nature. You give it up more, and your mind miraculously, or not so miraculously, turns towards the spiritual path. Why? Because the body is really untenable. The body is not nice. Simple, but also powerful. And the same thing with the idea of trying to cure illnesses. Very often we deny that we are ill, first of all. We don't really want to know about it. And then the second thing we do is we think, how can we deal with it? We take some medicines, trying to overcome it. And of course, you should take medicines. But you should never kind of fall into the illusion that medicines can always cure the illness. You never fall into the illusion that there's always a way out. You should always understand that this is just a stopgap. It's only a band-aid, and it will only last for so long. And then you have a problem again. So again, understanding the nature of things. And it makes you reject the body a little bit. And it turns you towards the spiritual path. Seeking the freedom from sickness. Then we have the freedom from dying, or dying coming next, themselves liable to die. Understand the drawbacks in being liable to die. Seek the freedom from death, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment. So you understand the drawbacks in dying. And it's kind of obvious, but it's useful to, I think, to always think about again the drawbacks of dying. And there is a number of things that you can add to this list, but one of the drawbacks is that when you die, you have to give up everything. This is a very powerful contemplation. Everything has to go. Everything you own in this world has to go. This is far worse for a layperson than for a monastic. All I have to give up is my laptop. The rest is that's difficult enough, I can tell you. I'm really attached to this laptop, but so everything has to go. Nothing can be taken with you. How long are you going to keep your possessions for? How long are the people in your life who are important to you, who are dear to you, how long will they last? They will only last a very short time. Life is short, right? You don't know. What if you're going to die tomorrow? How much do you want to invest in all your relationships, in all your property, if you're going to die soon? This is the idea that death is always an ever-present possibility at any time. And when you start to get that, you don't really want to invest in things that belong to this world, because everything in this world is so ephemeral. It lasts for such a short time. Do you really want to invest in the things in this world when they can go at any time? No, the things you want to invest in are the things you can take with you into the future. For goodness sake, have faith in rebirth. This is the reality. It changes so much in how we live our lives. This is not just a small matter, the idea of rebirth. It's an enormous thing. And at that moment, when you kind of understand that, then you kind of expand out your idea of what life is really about. You start to invest in a new way. What you invest in is this broad kind of thing called the continuation of existence. You, at the very least, you make sure that you have a good rebirth, or that your future self is kind of in a good place. Yeah. Instead of investing in this little life, you invest in your kamma. You are the heir of your kamma, as it says in the suttas, kamma sakka. The kamma is your own. And of course, ultimately, all of this, it goes even beyond that. It goes beyond all death. The freedom from death altogether, because you understand that dying itself is problematic. So everything has to go when you die. Why do we keep investing so much in these things? But it's not just the fact that everything has to go, but it is also the uncertainty of dying, yeah? That's why often dying is so kind of frightening. Everything has to go, there's nothing to hold on to, and then on top of that, we go to an uncertain future. It's a really difficult combination, yeah? It's because there's nothing to hold on to, and the future is very uncertain. And so this is why dying is so incredibly hard. There's so many problems with dying, and why people have such problems with it. So you reflect on these things, and don't think you can control it. Just as we're trying to, or very often the first thing to remember is that we deny the idea of death. Yeah, we don't think it's going to happen to us. We don't think it's going to happen tomorrow. Already you're wrong. If you don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, you're wrong. It may happen tomorrow. You just have no idea when it's going to happen. If you think, at least I have a few years, that's already wrong thinking right there. You just don't know when it's going to happen. And this is a very powerful insight that makes it ever present. It draws you into the present right now. There was a thing, for quite a long time ago, I read this in a newspaper somewhere or whatever it was, and this was a research I think done in South Africa, and it was kind of a fascinating idea about how people deny the idea of death. They don't really want to deal with it. And according to this research, they researched what happens when people read about death in a newspaper. How do people react to reading about death in a newspaper? And what they found is that when people read about it, they other it. They distance themselves from it. They feel, that was just someone else. It got nothing to do with me. Or they were just foolish. They went to the wrong place at the wrong time. They distance themselves from it. They other it in the sense of not really relating to it. So they kind of, they don't really grasp what is going on. And that is, of course, where we go wrong. If you read about someone dying in a newspaper or wherever, that is you right there. This is how you are very likely going to die. You're going to be like one of these people that you read about. You're going to die in an accident on the road. You're going to die of old age, of dementia in a hospital. You're going to die for one of these many reasons that people die from. That is you right there, and you don't know when it's going to happen. Don't other it. Don't make it something that has nothing to do with you. It has to do with you. This is you, right there. Use these opportunities to understand the ever-presence of death. This is kind of the point. And then you make it real, right? This is the power of this. So don't reject it, first of all. First of all, acceptance is such an important thing. And then the next thing, again, is that, again, we involve the idea of the self. We think, okay, I'm going to do the very best to put off death. I'm going to exercise a little bit. I'm going to eat the right kind of food. I'm going to not eat too many sweets, and I'm going to eat kind of salads and vegetables, and I'm not going to smoke, and not going to drink. I'm a good Buddhist. I'm going to meditate to keep my blood pressure down. I'm going to do all of these kind of things. I'm going to live probably till I'm 90 at least. Maybe 95. So at least 10 more years. I'm sure I'm going to have 10 more years. And I'm not saying that you should live like Ajahn Brahmali, like, eating all fats and sugar. And I'm not suggesting that you should live like that. I'm not suggesting you should live in a bad way. Please don't live like Ajahn Brahmali, because Ajahn Brahmali, for him, Whether he dies or not, for him it doesn't matter. For you, it may make a difference. So please live in a wise way. Yeah, don't. Sometimes I'm afraid people follow the wrong thing in Ajahn Brahma. You should follow the samadhi, not the diet. Right? This is important. Follow the right thing. Yeah? And and Ajahn Brahm is very casual about his eating habits, and that's fine with him. So please eat well, do the right thing, maximize the chances of living well, but also know that this is no guarantee that you will live well, that you're going to live long. Still, you may get cancer, still you may get a heart attack, still you can go into the street and get run over by a car, obviously. So don't think that you can control these things. Again, this is the second mistake we do. We are allowing the sense of self to think it is in charge of these things, but actually it is not really in charge at all. All we can do is really maximize the possibilities. So again, it is an insight into impermanence and unreliability. We don't know when it's going to happen. It is an insight into non-self, if you understand it right. We are not in charge, really, of our life in this way. Death is actually very scary. And the more you bring death into the present moment, the more you understand you can die at any time. The more you get that, the more all the nonsense disappears from your life. You stop doing silly things. You stop wasting your time. You stop saying and doing things that are not really conducive to the path. It's a very powerful contemplations. One of the things that I have always found so fascinating, now we are dealing with the Arya Pariyesana Sutta, the noble search. The Buddha, we shall see in a second, is doing exactly these things. This is how the Buddha to be contemplated, yeah? And of course, the main contemplation here, the main thing we're talking about is really death, because death brings together the idea of old age, it brings together the idea of sickness. Death is really the big one. And when you start to understand that, you understand that the power of these reflections is what made the Buddha. That's what created the Buddha. These very simple reflections. Sometimes we think of the Buddha as this extraordinary advanced person with this amazing intelligence and insight into the nature of things. Yes, he eventually got that insight into the nature of things, but his starting point is so simple. Yeah, these are the powerful things that led him to awakening. We have the Dhamma, we have Buddhism today because the Buddha had insight into these things. And what that means is that these simple contemplations are actually very, very powerful. So don't underestimate these contemplations. Do them properly, do them so that they really bite, so they have an effect on your life. And then maybe you will also go in the same direction as the Buddha. It's kind of extraordinary to think of the fact that the Buddha did these contemplation, and this is what led the Buddha to become the Buddha. It's kind of remarkable, isn't it? It seems so almost too good to be true, but that's actually what seems to have happened. This is how the Buddha explains his own life. So, themselves liable to sorrow, understanding the drawbacks in being liable to sorrow, seeks the freedom from sorrow, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment. So you are liable to sorrow, and you are always going to sorrow. Life is quite problematic. You can kind of know beforehand. We had these discussions today in the discussion time, and people were saying that, I know I'm going to sorrow when my parents die, or anyone close to me, dear to me, is going to die. You can kind of predict it. You can feel it in your bones. This is going to happen. And so we are all liable to sorrow. It is unavoidable. It is a part and parcel of being a human being. If you're born, you're going to sorrow. That's kind of how it goes. And of course, that is really unsatisfactory. And so then you decide again to find the freedom from sorrow, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke. You are yoked to sorrow. Yoked, bound, hand and feet, fettered to sorrow. And now you want to extinguish that sorrow. Someone is themselves liable to be corrupted. Understand the drawbacks in being liable to be corrupted, seeks the freedom from corruption, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment. And this is kind of scary, yeah? The drawbacks in being liable to be corrupted. What does that mean? It means that our character is forged and manipulated as we go through the rounds of rebirth. Depending on where you get reborn, depending on the family you get reborn into, depending on the society you get reborn into, your character will be formed by that society. And even if you build up some very beautiful characters in this life, yes, you will take those character traits with you in the next life, but then the conditioning continues. And by the end of next life, maybe you have lost many of those good qualities because of the conditioning of that society. Why? Because you are liable to be corrupted. Sometimes we have this idea, I practice to the very best I can in this life. And maybe you do. And maybe you build up lots of really nice qualities in this life. Yeah? And well, good on you if you do that. And hopefully, if you then get reborn in a Buddhist country, in a Buddhist situation in your next life, hopefully you can carry on. But there is no guarantee. You don't know what's going to happen in your next life. Maybe there is no Buddhism. Can you still hear me with the rain? Yeah? Maybe there is no Buddhism. Maybe there is no possibility. Maybe there are no Kalyanamitas. Maybe everything starts to go haywire. The point is, samsaric existence is very, very uncertain. We have no idea where it's going to lead, where it's going to take us. And so the idea that we are liable to corruption is actually very frightening because it shows us that there is no direction in our life. Maybe you feel like you are a good person, you have a good feeling about yourself. And that good feeling, remember how uncertain it is. It can turn around very, very easily. You can lose that good feeling inside and you can be heading in the wrong direction. So this is the downside. When someone gets very depressed, sometimes they commit suicide because they are depressed. Yeah, and that's because they think the depression is often permanent. That's what it feels like. It's permanent. You can't get out of this. We have a tendency to feel that the way we are now has a permanence to it. But just as the depression is not permanent, as you can overcome it at any time, the same thing is true of the good feelings as well. Yeah, the positive feelings you have, the fact that you are a Buddhist, the fact that you are developing these good qualities, they too are just as unreliable. It feels like they are permanent. This is kind of the scary thing about the sense of self. The sense of self does not understand how unreliable these things are. And before you know it, it's turned upside down and you have lost all of those good qualities. It's very hard to see because the sense of self takes credit for all the good qualities. It feels like they are stable when in fact they are very, very unstable. So it's important to remember these things. And then you start to get the sense for how scary everything is, how unreliable everything is, what impermanence and unreliability and uncertainty, really what it means. It means this, you're walking on this floor that is always shaking. You never know when it's going to shake a little bit extra and you're going to fall over. It's like this continuous impermanence, the continuous low-level earthquake, always moving under you. Never know when it's really going to take off and really be destructive in a big way. I'm glad we have some joy on the path, right? Because this is sounding pretty dismal. So it's a good thing we have joy to balance all of this, otherwise we'd be in serious trouble. So these are the various things that the Buddha is talking about. And this is the noble quest. Yeah, this is what it means to have the noble quest. And with all of these things, if you contemplate them in the right way, it means you understand the dangers of samsaric existence, the danger of life, and it turns, the idea here is to help you to let go, This is the idea. The idea is not to make you depressed and sad, but to help you to let go. And if you do let go, then these contemplations are doing the right work. Then when you let go, the mind turns to the spiritual path, and then you are on the right track. So now what comes next? The Buddha talks about himself again. Mendicants, before my awakening, when I was still unawakened but intent on awakening, I too, being liable to be reborn, sought what is also liable to be reborn. Myself liable to grow old, myself liable to fall sick, myself liable to die, myself liable to sorrow, myself liable to become corrupted. I sought what is also liable to these things. This is the Buddha to be talking before his awakening. And again, you get this feeling of the Buddha is just an ordinary human being. He is liable to grow old like anyone else. He is liable to fall sick like anyone else. He is liable to die like everyone else. But not only that, he is also liable to sorrow, right? He is also sad when things go wrong. The Buddha also, because he's not awakened yet, he has certain attachments. The Buddha to be is also liable to sorrow. Not the Buddha, but the Buddha to be. He is liable to become corrupted. It means that the defilements, even for the Buddha, can come back at any time. This is very counter to the Bodhisattva idea, right? The Bodhisattva idea is about this being who purifies themselves for incalculable eons. And the point, of course, is that you are kind of guaranteed to awaken in your last life. But here the Buddha is saying about himself, he's liable to become corrupted. It doesn't sound like someone who is on the Bodhisattva path. It sounds like an ordinary person who has the same issues, the same problems as everyone else. It is good to think of the Buddha as not having practiced the Bodhisattva path, because if you think of the Buddha like that, it makes the Buddha somehow very different from us. It creates a chasm between us and the Buddha, a distance that is almost unbridgeable. And yet here, what we are seeing is the ordinary human qualities in the Buddha to be, just like in us. And I think that is very useful. The Buddha understands what it is to be an ordinary human being. And so he says that he already had these problems, and he was seeking the same things. He was seeking things that were also were subject or liable to the same things. Yeah. So the Buddha also, we know, he had a wife, he had a child, he was quite wealthy and well off. Yeah. So he had all of these trappings in life, the money, and all of these kind of things. And so he's saying that he sought all of these things as well. He too had attachment. That's essentially what he's saying. He too had the same problems as we are having as human beings. It's kind of very fascinating when you look at the details of what this is saying. It kind of brings you to understand the Buddha, not the Buddha, but the Buddha to be, before the awakening, the Bodhisattva. You come to understand who this person actually is. And I think the Buddha is doing this deliberately, because the Buddha knows that he is showing us that I have this problem. I found a solution to it. Follow my example, and you also will be free of these things. That is really what the Buddha is saying. He's saying this out of compassion for us, to show that he understands our predicament. So then it occurred to me, why do I, being liable to be reborn, liable to grow old, liable to fall sick, liable to sorrow, liable to die, liable to become corrupted, seek things that have the same nature? The Buddha has realized that he is on the ignoble search. He has been searching in the wrong place. Why don't I seek the freedom from birth, the freedom from old age, the freedom from sickness, the freedom from death, the freedom from sorrow, the freedom from corruption, the supreme sanctuary from the yoke, extinguishment. So now the Buddha to be realized that he should look somewhere else for happiness. He should set out on the ignoble search, look for the solution to all of the problems of life. That is the noble search. And now this is the beginning of the Buddha moving in that direction. And so this is kind of the power of the Buddha, right? The power of the Buddha is staring the problems of life in the face, looking exactly at what is going on, and then seeking a solution to these things. Seeking a solution to things that no one else would really think of seeking a solution to. Yeah, how can you find a solution to death? You have to be you have to have very powerful spiritual faculties to even think that thought. Of course, in ancient India, it was a bit easier because in that society, this was what some people were already doing. There already were ascetics in the forest, practicing meditation, trying to find a solution to the problems of life. So it was a bit more obvious. But still, it's kind of audacious to do this. And this is where the power of the Buddha to be really is found. The power of the Buddha to be is this audacity, the power of the spiritual faculties that enables the Buddha to be to go against the grain, go against all the normal ways of society, and then seek the freedom from things that no one would ever really think of seeking the freedom from. And so the Buddha to be then sets out on this search. Right view, in a sense, has arisen in the Buddha. He has understood the danger, and then he sets out. And you will notice here that he already has a belief in rebirth, right? He says, why do I, being liable to be reborn? The Buddha already has taken that on board. He has faith in the idea of rebirth. Why? Because, well, that is the teaching in the society around him. And he has no grounds for not having faith in that. And this is kind of very interesting because it shows us that whether you have faith in rebirth or not very often depends on the conditions of the society you are in. We are conditioned by things around us. And one reason why many modern people do not have faith in rebirth is not because rebirth doesn't make any sense. It's not because rebirth is wrong. It's just that the conditions in our society do not favor that idea. They go against that idea sometimes. So it's just the prevailing conditions are against rebirth. Yeah, it's just a cultural conditioning, as I was saying the other day. That's really all it is. So we are culturally conditioned not to believe in it, and so we become skeptical. But at that time, the cultural conditioning was the other way around. So why not believe in it? So be careful with the cultural conditioning. And I say that the only non-cultural conditioning is the sense that the Buddha had insight into these things. And if the Buddha had insight into them, then it is not a cultural conditioning, it is a real insight into the nature of existence. That is what I have confidence in. That's what it means to have confidence in the Buddha. So the Buddha took that on board. Yeah, he had faith in that because why not? There were many markers in society, many good reasons to have faith in it. Even though there were people at that time who did not believe in rebirth, they already existed at the time of the Buddha. We know that from other places in the suttas. But the Buddha balanced things up and decided, of course, there is rebirth. And then he used that as part of his contemplation for getting out of the problem. Just going to finish off this sutta. Sometime later, while still black-haired, blessed with youth, in the prime of life, though my mother and father wished otherwise, weeping with tearful faces, I shaved off my hair and beard, dressed in the ochre robes, and went forth from lay life to homelessness. This is the Buddha to be, going forth, becoming a monk. And this is the right intention. You see, the right view is all the contemplation of these things. From right view comes right intention. Here, right intention is the intention to go forth, the nekama and all the things that followed. So the Buddha was still young, black-haired, blessed with youth, in the prime of life. Interesting here, my mother and father wished otherwise with tearful faces. So sometimes you hear that the Buddha, some people say that the Buddha he was kind of cold, he didn't really look after his family. But obviously he had had conversation with his family. He'd obviously told them that he wanted to be a monk. So obviously he had organized for his wife and his son and things to be looked after. Otherwise he wouldn't have done this. And the later legend of the Buddha, when he kind of rides off in the middle of the night on the horse Kantaka, and he kind of sees his wife and his son sleeping, that is the mythology. This is the reality. And this is why the suttas are quite interesting, because sometimes they show us the mythology and the legend of the later ideas that you find, for example, in the Jataka Nidana, which talks about the life of the Buddha in great detail in a mythological way. Anyway, that is it for now. And there's a lot of, I think, food for thought there. Lots of ideas about how we can start to contemplate the Dhamma. This is kind of the purpose now. Now we're moving into the ideas of sanya, how to perceive our life. All of these things are really sanyas that you can develop. And Marana Sanya is specifically mentioned in the suttas, but these other things are also sanyas. And now this is how you can do it. This is one way that I suggest to you. And now it's up to you to see how you can make something out of this. This is all for now, so please have a little bit of nice tea or whatever it is. Actually, Venerable Dhamita, he gets no rest because now he has to translate. I think he works more hours than I do. I don't know how he does it, but anyway, he does, so which is great. So let's see you back again in an hour's time for the Q&A session here.